All right, a little off the cuff here. The Bright Hope of Defeatism by Pastor Kendall Langford, the Shepherd's Church YouTube channel, a practical post-millennialism series. Well, he's going to try to give a critique of premillennialism and a practical post-millennialism series. See, this is the confusion right here. This is confusion because really the categories we need to talk about are, of course, the millennium. If you want to talk about the millennium, the truth about the millennium, we have to understand these 5 views of the millennium of Revelation chapter 20. Now, notice I put Revelation chapter 20. This is the only place in all of Scripture that talks about a millennium. This is the only place. It was only revealed to the Apostle John, most likely at the time, the last living apostle of Jesus Christ on the earth. So the millennium is only found in Revelation chapter 20. That's why I always try to push my post-millennialist friends and amillennialist friends. Amillennialists are usually better at this than post-millennialists. And that is actually go to Revelation chapter 20. Actually go to Revelation chapter 20.
While premillennialism does provide a framework for understanding the end times, it's not a very good one. In fact, it is a thoroughly wretched one that is miles away from the biblical text.
A wretched one. Premillennialism is a wretched one, far away from the biblical text. Well, there's lots we can talk about. Revelation chapter 20. And really, you want to go 19 through 20 if you're a premillennialist, because you believe that Revelation 19 and 20 are chronological to one another. And that is, and really you need to go back to Revelation 18. And in order to go to Revelation 18, you need to go back to Revelation 17. In order to do that, you need to go back to Revelation 16 and, so forth. So, but here we have Revelation 19 through 20. This is what happens as a result of the return of the King, the second advent of Christ. This is a result of what happens at the second advent of Christ. But Revelation 19, verses 11 through 21, this is the end of Revelation. This is like the second part of Revelation 19. We already saw that there was a marriage supper of the Lamb. Marriage supper, the marriage of the Lamb has come. Bride has made herself ready. It's granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure, because this is the righteous deeds of the saints, which God had foreordained that we would walk in them, predestined that we would walk in these righteous deeds. So they're still not attributed to us. They're attributable to God, the righteous deeds of the saints. In case you think your works are something special, well, they are, only insofar as that they have been foreordained by God. Blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. Fell down to worship at his feet, this angel who said to me, but he said to me, you must not do that. I'm a fellow servant with you and your brothers who hold to the testimony, the words, the propositions of Jesus and the propositions concerning Jesus. Martin Luther called them assertions. Martin Luther said right away at the beginning of The Bondage of the Will in his preface, he said, you take away assertions, you take away Christianity. There is no Christianity without testimony, without assertions or propositions. Words put together that mean stuff. For the words of Jesus, the propositions of Jesus, the assertions of Jesus, it are the spirit of prophecy. Rider on a white horse, he judges and makes war. Okay, this is about the second advent right here. He comes back to judge and to make war. He will tread the winepress of the love of God. He will tread the winepress of the love of God. No. What's he coming to do? He's coming to strike down the nations with the armies of heaven. He is called the Word of God, the assertion, the proposition of God. All the truths of God reside in him. He will tread the winepress of the fury, of the wrath of God, the Almighty. And on his robe and on his thigh, he has a name written, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. He doesn't play for the Vikings. He doesn't play for any other NFL team or NHL team or baseball team, MLB, NBA. He is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he wears it on his robe and on his thigh. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun. He called to the birds that fly directly overhead, "Come gather for the great supper of God." Why would he call to the birds? Right? We saw the marriage supper of the Lamb. This is going to be in heaven, by the way, in heaven, at the second advent. This is going to be the supper for the fowl of the air, the birds that fly directly overhead. Come gather for that great supper. Why? Because verse 21, all the birds will be gorged with the flesh of all the wicked who have come up against Christ with their armies and gathered to make war against him who is sitting on the horse and against his army at the second advent. At the second advent. Okay, all the birds were gorged with the wicked's flesh who are slain at the second advent of Christ, whereas Christ's people go up to heaven. So that's what gets into Revelation chapter 20. So the reason why the dragon is seized, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years is because the earth will be desolate for 1,000 years, void of all human life. There might be some birds who last for a little while, feasting on the flesh of the wicked who are dead, laid strewn about by the reaping angels who have accompanied Christ at his second advent. But they're dead. So Satan, he has no more entrance into heaven, can't come up to heaven. He has a great chain of circumstances. He is bound on a desolate earth for 1,000-year prison term. He and his fallen angels. 1,000-year prison term with no one to deceive, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer, because they're dead until the 1,000 years are ended. But after that, he must be released for a little while. Why? Because after the 1,000 years, while the saints are reigning in heaven for 1,000 years, enjoying 1,000-year marriage supper of the Lamb, Lord's Supper, studying the books, having a place prepared for them that Jesus said he was going to do, Satan's going to be bound on the desolate earth for 1,000 years with no one to deceive or tempt or manipulate or anything. It'll be like 1,000-year solitary confinement of Satan and his angels. So verse 5, the rest of the dead do not come to life until the 1,000 years are ended, and they will experience the second death. So all the wicked will die twice, whereas all Christ's people will have died only once, and some not at all. And I think only one instance of somebody dying twice, perhaps. Maybe another person dying twice. Lazarus, Jesus' friend Lazarus, of course, had to die a second death because he was resurrected to demonstrate the power of Jesus and miraculous works. But he had to die again, unfortunately. But this generally is referring to the wicked over such the second death, and the second death will be the final judgment, the final destruction in the lake of fire. But a lot of them have been destroyed at the second advent, at least those who were living at the time. But they will be resurrected again. When the 1,000 years are ended, then Satan will be released from his prison. Why? Because the rest of the dead are now resurrected. That's how he will be released from his prison, to go out to deceive the nations again, because now they're alive again. And this is when the Gog and Magog war happens, unlike what dispensational futurists talk about. The Gog and Magog war will happen either before a pre-trib rapture or during the mythical 7-year period of tribulation or something like that. Which is obviously fallacious. That's what happens when you actually break down dispensational futurism properly. The 5 main false teachings of the dispensational futurist eschatological system: a pre-trib rapture, that's false. 7-year period of tribulation, false. Rise of a single Mr. Diabolical called Antichrist, that's false. Antichrist has been with us for over 1,260 years. 4, that the modern nation state that calls itself Israel has a pivotal role to play in end times events. It does not. And that finally at the second advent, Christ will come and destroy all the wicked and set up a 1,000-year reign on the earth. False. It is not on the earth. It is in heaven for 1,000 years. The earth is desolate at this time. Only after when the 1,000 years are ended will Satan be released from his prison. And they will come up against the beloved city, the new heavenly Jerusalem, which has descended from heaven down to the earth after the 1,000 years. That's in Revelation 21. So you can see these are not strict chronologies, but there are chronological aspects to Revelation 19 and 20, and the seals and the trumpets and the seven thunders that John is told not to write about. Those are obviously subsequent, chronological. And so what else do we have here? I think we're going a little bit. Let's see here.
You could, if you wanted, do a lot of things. You could drink a gallon of windshield washer fluid, but that's certainly not advisable. It was not going to quench your thirst either. It's just going to leave you empty inside and sick. Well, in the same way, holding to a premillennial view of the end times is certainly possible. You can do it, but it's not going to be helpful. It's going to...
Okay, the millennium. He's talking primarily about the dispensational futurist premillennial view, but he's not talking about the future. He did mention something about futurism and something. I don't even think he mentioned his own preterism, which is very telling indeed as well. Preterism and futurism. Here you go. Truly amazing to witness preterists arguing with futurists and vice versa. Just a summary of the two positions. Preterists are teaching that the majority of the book of Revelation is simply relaying events surrounding the siege of Jerusalem and the subsequent destruction of the city and its temple in 70 AD. Then there's a huge time gap that occurs between 70 AD and the Second Advent. Okay, huge time gap occurs between 70 AD. So don't worry about the Antichrist and all that stuff, because the Antichrist was way in the distant past. Dispensational Futurism, on the other hand, believe that only the opening chapters of the book of Revelation have to do with the church, but that the majority of the events recorded therein after Revelation 6 through 19, roughly, are still future from even our own time. Futurism, including the rise of the Antichrist. So Antichrist for preterists, distant past. We don't need to worry about Antichrist. That's all done now. That's completely fallacious. Abandonment of the Reformation. Number 2, futurism. Antichrist is future even from our own time. That is fallacious. An abandonment of the Reformation. Both of these, preterism and futurism, are both abandonments of the Reformation and an abandonments of church history, really, when you talk about 70 AD, because here's Irenaeus. Irenaeus, circa 130 to 220, or 202, AD. 130 to 202. This is long after the events of 70 AD. 70 AD. So long after that, but here's what Irenaeus says. In Ante-Nicene Fathers, Volume 1, Irenaeus, Against Heresies, Book 5, and we're going to go down to chapter 26. No, wait, now. Whoops. 26. 26. Notice this. So the Antichrist wasn't going to arise until the dissolution and desolation of the Roman Empire, according to Irenaeus. I'm saying Irenaeus was 100% spot on, correct, accurate. John and Daniel, says Irenaeus, have predicted the dissolution and desolation of the Roman Empire, which shall precede the end of the world and the eternal kingdom of Christ. See that? Let's go a little bit. John in the Apocalypse indicated to the Lord's disciples what shall happen in the last times, and concerning the 10 kings who shall then arise, and these 10 horns shall be, which were seen by Daniel in Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7, the 10 horns that rose, and then the 3 of them were plucked up by the roots, and the little horn would arise in Daniel chapter 7. I don't want to get too long here. In Daniel chapter 7. So the wonder if I should do this. Well, we can do Daniel 7, or I can go to my what rough beast and the Antichrist. Okay, let me scroll up. I don't mean to make people dizzy. Daniel 7, what rough beast in the Antichrist? Futurism says the Antichrist or the little horn of Daniel 7. That's the Antichrist. Futurism says will be a future Mr. Diabolical. Preterism was a single Mr. Diabolical in the distant past leading up to about 70 AD. Both of these systems are false. Daniel 7 gives us a repeat and expanded version of Daniel chapter 2. That's the hermeneutic principle there of repeat and expand or review and enlarge. Jesus did this all the time in his parables. He's repeating and expanding a different aspect of the same thing throughout many of his parables. 4 great beasts coming up out of the sea, indicating that a beast is an empire. A beast in Bible prophecy is indicative of an empire, not a single solitary individual human being. So we're going to go through those. The 3 ribs, that's a bear raised up on one side. The second beast, the third, like a leopard, and then a 4th beast. And there's the 10 horns. And there came up among them another one, a little horn. There's the Antichrist, before which 3 of the 10 were plucked up by the roots. 3 of the 10 were plucked up by the roots before this little horn could arise. And this little horn, notice this, had a mouth speaking great things. That is, great false assertions. Great false assertions, false doctrine. Daniel 7, the 4 beasts, the Babylonian Empire, followed by the Medo-Persian Empire. Give a little bit about the 3 ribs in its teeth here. The Grecian Empire under Alexander the Great and his conquests, and then the breakup of the Grecian Empire into 4, and then reduced down to 2, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, and each having their power geography of power, and then the rise of the Roman Empire, of course. 2 legs of iron. But then the breakup of the Roman Empire does not happen until 476 AD, and that is what Irenaeus was talking about here. He has already foreshadowed the partition and division which shall take place, and this is the end of the end of the 4th kingdom. And since an end shall take place, see, he's still talking about it. Therefore, the great God showed future things by Daniel and confirmed them by his Son. And if Christ is the stone which is cut without hands, who shall destroy temporal kingdoms? See, Christ is the stone, but it represents his second advent, not his first, in Daniel chapter 2, which is the resurrection of the just. For those things which have been predicted by the Creator alike through all the prophets has Christ fulfilled in the end, ministering to his Father's will and completing his dispensations with regard to the human race. All the Gnostics, falsely so called, be recognized as agents of Satan by all those who worship it. Remember, he's writing this against against the Gnostics, but in doing so, he's talking about future things. Let's see, the future judgment by Christ, communion, separation. So he's talking about the second advent, the second coming, to order the reapers to collect first the tares together and bind them in bundles and burn them with unquenchable fire, but to gather up the wheat into the barn. Again, that's the parable of the wheat and the tares, or the wheat and the weeds of Matthew chapter 13, verses 24 through 36, and then Jesus' explanation of it in verses 36 through 43. So Matthew 13, 24 through 30, that's the parable of the wheat and the tares, and then Jesus' explanation of it of that parable in Matthew 13, same chapter, just a few verses later, starting at about verse 36, where he begins the explanation. Explain to us the parable of the wheat and the tares, they say to Jesus, his disciples. And he explains to them, it's about the end of the world, not 70 AD. Say, Irenaeus doesn't think it's 70 AD. Here, let's go to Hippolytus, Tertullian and Hippolytus here. They're writing later than Irenaeus. Tertullian and Hippolytus, late 2nd to early 3rd centuries AD, on the future rise of the Antichrist only after the fall of the Roman Empire. So this is a disputation of both Preterism and Futurism. So what we were talking about, Pastor Kendall, again, premillennialism versus postmillennialism. Well, first of all, we need to talk about your Preterism. That's first and foremost, we need to talk about your false preterism before we even get to issues of the Millennium of Revelation chapter 20, which is toward the end of the book of Revelation. We need to talk about the whole book of Revelation as laying out church history for us, because that's the way the early church and the Reformation all viewed it. They all viewed it that way. Bible prophecy was church history foreshadowed, foreordained, foretold, foreprophesied. That's what the book of Revelation is really all about. Tertullian, Ante-Nicene Fathers, Volume 3. He is the father of Latin Christianity. Tertullian was one of the earliest church fathers to be educated in Latin. New Latin, in fact, invented like 250 new Latin words or something like that, which Dr. Calhoun at Covenant Theological Seminary, who teaches and or taught church history there, said apparently the Latin language was just not big enough for Tertullian. He was so dry, but he was so good. It's so funny. Means of this present, that is to say, this present empire, that the fourth, right here, he sits in the temple of God. You know what detaineth or restrains him, that he might be revealed in his time. That is the man of sin, son of perdition, the Antichrist. He's quoting from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 here, verses 1 through 7. The man of sin would not arise until the restrainer was taken out of the way. You know what restrains him now, Paul said. So here is Tertullian saying, what obstacle is there but the Roman state? The Roman state, the falling away of which, being scattered into 10 kingdoms, shall introduce Antichrist upon its own ruins. Here is what rough beasts again, the Roman Empire. Upon the ruins of the Roman Empire, then 10 horns or 10 tribal kingdoms will spring out of that. The 10 horns will, that's what Tertullian is talking about here. Into 10 kingdoms shall introduce Antichrist upon the ruins of the Roman state. Again, Tertullian, notice when he is living, he dies in 220 AD, early 3rd century AD. So the Roman Empire had a couple hundred more years to go on after Tertullian's time before it fell. But Tertullian knew, because of Bible prophecy, the Roman state will collapse. It will go into ruin eventually, and then Antichrist will be introduced upon its ruins. So the Roman Empire, to Tertullian, taken out of the way, persecutes the bride of Christ. Necessity for the emperors, for the... So here, there's another greater necessity for our offering prayer. Notice, offering prayer in behalf of the emperors, the Roman empires, nay for the complete stability of the empire and for Roman interests in general. That's Tertullian. We know that all these dooms impending over the whole earth, the rise of the Antichrist, are only being retarded by the continued existence of the Roman Empire. Okay? They're only being held off until after the fall of the Roman Empire. So we pray. We pray for the continuance of the Roman Empire, and in doing so, we are lending our aid to Rome's duration, because we are praying that the coming of this Antichrist and all these judgments are only being kept back or retarded by the continued existence of the Roman Empire. There are people who actually would want to censor that word too. Just Hippolytus of Rome, AD, again, early 3rd century, talking about the Antichrist only rising to power and dominance after the fall of the Roman Empire. After the fall of the Roman Empire. Hippolytus, that's volume 5 of the Ante-Nicene Fathers. Hippolytus, Extant Works, Fragments, Part 2, Treatise on Christ and the Antichrist. Nebuchadnezzar's vision in Daniel chapter 2. He says, yep, we need to blend Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 together. he says, if we set Daniel's own visions also side by side with this of Daniel chapter 2, then we shall have one exposition to give of the two together. Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 are to be read concordant with each other. And how concordant with each other they are, and how true. The leopard, the fourth beast, and then the little horn that arises up. And who are these but the Romans, the fourth beast, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, had iron teeth, claws of breath. Who are these but the Romans, the kingdom which is now established? So these things, the rise or the fall of the fourth beast and the rise of the 10 horns and the little horn, the Antichrist, would only arise after the fall of the Roman Empire, because he says these. These then are in the future. The fourth beast are distributed over 10 kingdoms in the future. The Romans, who hold the sovereignty at present time, but the 10 horns, emblems of the kingdoms that are yet to rise. And another little horn that grows up among them meant the Antichrist in their midst. All these things have come to pass. The iron already rules, but how the little horn shall spring up in their midst, these things shall be in the future, beloved, after the fall of the Roman Empire. Fall of the Roman Empire, 476 AD. You see that? And these are the 10 tribal kingdoms that made up the Roman Empire after its fall. The Ostrogoths, Burgundians, the Vandals, the Heruli, the Visigoths, the Suevi, the Alemanni, the Franks, the Saxons, the Lombards. All various nations that make up Europe today. And historicist Dr. John Gill, in his commentary on Daniel 7:24, I show this to demonstrate that the Reformation was historicist. It wasn't futurist and it wasn't preterist. It was historicist. So was Irenaeus, so was Tertullian, so was Hippolytus. Dr. John Gill, contemporaneous with Dr. Jonathan Edwards. And Jonathan Edwards would have held the same view as Dr. John Gill on these issues. Same view, because they were historicists, not preterists and not futurists. I so lament all of this, that because they don't know how to properly break down dispensational futurism, Pastor Kendall and others, this is how you break it down. But because they don't have the truth to replace dispensational futurism, they fall into the exact opposite error of preterism. And then they couple it with postmillennialism, which is a whole different ballgame. What are we talking about? Daniel 7. 10 horns, 10 kingdoms, which sprung out of the Roman Empire, from Dr. John Gill's commentary upon the dissolution of the Roman Empire in about AD 476. He gives Meade's list, very similar to my own. Newton's list Gill provides in his commentary, very similar to my own. But 3 of them would have to be plucked up by the roots. This little horn spoke great things. This horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. Notice that? Doom and gloom? Absolutely. There's some doom and gloom. If you're a dispensational futurist and you believe this hasn't happened yet, I'm not. I'm an historicist. I believe this happened throughout church history. Doom and gloom? There's still doom and gloom coming, Pastor Kendall. There's still doom and gloom. You better be warning people, not with errors, falsehoods, and lies of high partial preterism coupled with postmillennialist nonsense. You better be warning Christ people. This horn made war with the saints and, check it out, prevailed over them. Does that mean that they are not going to be resurrected? No, he says war with the saints and prevailed over with them. What? In this life. Because they're called saints. They cannot be prevailed over. Death cannot hold them. But in this life, they held to a bunch of false doctrines. But they will still be resurrected unto glory. Okay? Prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came and the judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Little horn is the Antichrist. 3 of the 10 would have to be removed first. That was the Heruli, Vandals, Ostrogoths. Then that 1260 years began. Remember 1260 years? Let's go to Jonathan Edwards. Philip Schaff. This was the Volume 1 Ante-Nicene Fathers. I'm going to do ccel.org again. ccel.org, Christian Classics Ethereal Library. Of course, every Christian student should have access to this. Authors. Go down to and be using it. Edwards, right there. Jonathan Edwards, 1703 to 1758. Remember, Dr. Gill. Dr. John Gill was 1697. I got it up in here to 1771. Okay, 1697 to 1771 was Gill. And then Jonathan Edwards was contemporaneous with Gill, 1703 to 1758. Dies several years before Gill. But Edwards was over, obviously, in the American colonies. He's 100% American, Native American, because he was born here, and that's what native means. It does not mean indigenous or American Indian. It means native, means the place of your origin or birth. And he was born in America. He was 100% Native American. Works of Jonathan Edwards, Volume 1. Okay, not my fault people don't know language, but people want to constantly use propaganda terms and say, well, the Native Americans, this and that. And it's like, well, wait a minute. You mean the American Indians or indigenous Americans? Native Americans are those who were born here. So, history of the work of redemption. Period 3, from Christ's resurrection to the end of the world. We're talking about the day equals your principle. To the time of Constantine, part 3, right here, to the destruction of Jerusalem. He's not going to deny 70 AD, and that Bible prophecy from Matthew 24 didn't take place then. It absolutely did. But it's not the whole of Bible prophecy. Unbelievable how the Preterists will just, you guys, the whole of Bible prophecy is not your Preterist 70 AD, Kenneth L. Gentry before Jerusalem fell theory nonsense. That's not of the Reformation. Absolute, just it's unbelievable. But anyway, to the destruction of, to the time of Constantine, to the rise of Antichrist. Notice, way after the destruction of Jerusalem, after the time of Constantine, to the rise of Antichrist. Here, to the Reformation. Reformation came after the rise of Antichrist. From the rise of Antichrist to the Reformation. And this is after the time of Constantine. Watch this. Jonathan Edwards, Kingdom of Antichrist. I am far from pretending to determine the time when the reign of Antichrist began, but it is certain that the 1260 days or years, right here, 1260 literal years of the reign of Antichrist did not commence before the year of Christ 479. See? Did not commence before the year of Christ 479 or 476 AD. Okay? It commenced, the 1260 years commenced after. And I would just simply add to Edwards, 3 of the 10 would have to be plucked up by the roots first before that 1260 years would begin. And that's what Gill's pointing out here. Before which it made war with the saints, prevailed over them. Okay, so here's the 3, Heruli, Vandals, Ostrogoths, and then the Bishop of Rome, the Antichrist, could take his seat in the temple that is in the church of God via apostasy and apostatize the whole church, or at least as many as he could get his hands on. The Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. I go through that. They're usurpations of the 3 horns. They were the Arian, Christological, heretical holdouts of the Arian heresy. And they were wiped out. Former Roman Empire, Code of Justinian, the Bishop of Rome's ecclesiastical supremacy declared the Bishop of Rome as head of all the holy churches, also head of all the holy priests of God. These were letters from Justinian, but they were incorporated into the code as part of the code itself. Made the Bishop of Rome, so false ecclesiology already, big time false ecclesiology. Giving the Bishop of Rome ecclesiastical supremacy It was only after 538 AD, with the defeat of the Ostrogoths, the third horn, that the royal edict could take effect, even though it was dated to 533 AD. As long as the Ostrogoths were in Rome, it couldn't take effect until they were ousted. 1260 days or years. The rise of Antichrist was gradual. The Christian church corrupted itself in many things presently after Constantine time, growing more and more superstitious in its worship by degrees. The rise of Antichrist was gradual, and by degrees, bringing in many ceremonies into the worship of God, till at length they brought in the worship of saints and set up images in their churches. Okay, the Bishop of Rome assumed more and more authority to himself. It ties about how he was first just a minister of a congregation, then a standing moderator of a presbytery, then a diocesan bishop, then a metropolitan, which is equivalent to an archbishop, then a patriarch. There were 5 patriarchs at one time, and afterwards he claimed power of universal bishop over the whole Christian church. So again, by degrees, the Christian church corrupted itself. In many things, the rise of Antichrist was gradual. The little horn. This is Jonathan Edwards is just going from Bible prophecy and church history here. He's seeing Bible prophecy playing out in church history. That's why church history matters. Here's another. Did early church fathers reject postmillennialism? Right response ministry. The issue is not postmillennialism. It's your high partial preterism versus futurism versus the proper view, historicism. That's what it is, Joel.
In the writings of Irenaeus. His lifespan was AD 130 to AD 202.
Exactly. And we already looked at Irenaeus and how it was after the fall of the Roman Empire, that's when the Antichrist would arise. Then Hippolytus, Tertullian, same thing. Let's see, what were we talking about? What rough beasts? So 1260 years from 538 AD. 1260 years. Jonathan Edwards, John Gill, what happened in 1260 years from 538 AD? 538, what, plus 1260 years equals, what's that? Equals, whoops. What is that? 1798. 1798. Let's find out what happened in 1798. Napoleon and the Catholic Church. How about that? Napoleon and the Catholic Church. Attack on Pius VI. This is the General Napoleon Bonaparte. French troops under his command defeated the papal army. And then General Louis Alexandre Berthier marched to Rome, entered it unopposed, February 1798, proclaimed a Roman Republic, demanded the Pope renounce his temporal power. Okay, what was Jonathan Edwards saying? What was he want to say? He was minister of a congregation, then a standing moderator, diocesan bishop, metropolitan, archbishop, then a patriarch. Afterwards, claimed universal bishop of the whole Christian church. Afterwards was confirmed in it by the civil power of the emperor. After that, he claimed power of a temporal prince and was wont to carry 2 swords to signify that both the temporal and spiritual sword were both his. Now they have the 2 keys. Okay, so not 2 swords, but 2 keys. Okay, but that signifies that he has the keys to both the temporal and spiritual world. If the Pope was pleased to excommunicate a prince or a king, all that king's subjects were at once freed from their allegiance to him and obliged not to own him anymore. They would put kingdoms in states under an interdict, so where all the sacred administrations could have no validity, so that in their apprehension they believed themselves to be in a damnable state. Notice, false doctrine leads to all kinds of false practices and false beliefs. As the Pope and his clergy robbed the people of their ecclesiastical and civil liberties and privileges, not just ecclesiastical, but also civil liberties and privileges. So they also robbed them of their estates and drained all Christendom of their money. You want to talk about the marriage of the church and the state? The harlotry, the great whore of Babylon, prostitute of Babylon, That's what she does. Who commits fornication with the kings of the earth. That is the papacy. The papacy. Pope Pius VII, Cardinal Caprera, Papal Legate to France, etc. But this deadly wound that was inflicted in 1798 has been healing ever since, and will continue on in power all the way up until the second advent of Christ. Pastor Kendall, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I'm going to bust down to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Notice this. The man of lawlessness, the son of destruction, also known as the man of sin, son of perdition, will what? Whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the breath of his mouth and bring to nothing by the appearance of his coming. Coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan, false signs and wonders, wicked deception, false doctrine, because they refuse to love the truth. Deception, believing errors, falsehoods, and lies to be the truth. See that? That's deception versus the truth. Deception is believing to be true what is in fact an error, a falsehood, a lie. That's why Scripture alone, sola scriptura, whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the... See, he will last all the way up until the second advent of Christ in power, on a throne. Okay, he's got a throne on the earth. Jesus isn't the only one with a kingdom. Revelation 13, verses 1 through 10, the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. And this throne, this Antichrist, will be on his throne all the way up until the second advent. 42 months right here. That's the 1260 years before receiving a deadly wound. It was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. Yeah, you better have a little bit of anxiety and alarm about these things. You better. You better not have a false hope. And you know what? Here's Daniel chapter 7. Notice this. Daniel chapter 7, verse 15. As for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. Anxiety, alarm. But I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth. It didn't matter if he had anxiety or great alarm in his heart, Pastor Kendall. Didn't matter. He still wanted to know the truth. Yeah, the truth hurts. That's a very real thing. The truth does hurt. It's painful. I lament over the truth of God. I lament over preterists and futurists who are distorting his prophetic word and abandoning the Reformation in doing so. I lament. I have anxiety about it, and I am very alarmed about it, but I still desired, verse 19, then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast and about the 10 horns that were on its head and the other horn that came up before which 3 of them fell, which had a mouth speaking great things, and this horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came. I still wanted to know all these things. Said Daniel. We're no better than Daniel. We ought not be arrogant about this little horn. Put down 3 kings. He shall speak words, propositions, assertions against the Most High, against the doctrines of the Most High. Wear out the saints of the Most High. Think to change times and law. They shall be given into his hand for a time, times, half a time. Jonathan Edwards, what did he say? Day equals years. 1260 years. Right there. Okay? So there you go, 43 minutes. I don't know. Has it been substantive? I hope so. I really don't want to do this again. Like do this video over again if I've made any errors in speaking or whatnot, but I don't know. Let's listen to Pastor Kendall one more time.
Undermine a biblical attitude of hope and worship. It's going to cause unbiblical behavior that's going to lead to passivity, inactivity, and other blatant sins. And as mentioned before, whenever a person becomes captivated with missions or discipleship or seeing the Lord's kingdom grow for the glory of Christ and seeing it spread on earth as the waters covers the sea, whenever that happens, it's not attributed to premillennialism. It's attributed really to the gospel or other doctrines. It's not
No, yeah, no. We don't begin with eschatology. Eschatology is the study of the end times. We're presupposing the doctrine of the Trinity. We're presupposing all the attributes of God, the theology proper. We're presupposing Christ focused, Christocentric, gospel-centered preaching and teaching. Definitely, definitely. But since your video is on eschatology, that's what we're talking about today. And yes, eschatology does matter because we will see Daniel in the heavenly kingdom, and Daniel's going to need a big hug. That's why. There's one reason. Daniel's just to know that Daniel's going to need a big hug from us because, like Jeremiah, the lamenting prophet, Daniel had anxiety and alarm because of all this. And we can look back and say, look, Daniel, all these things came to pass. Uh, After you died, Daniel, this and this and this and this and this, and we're going to be all able to share this together. So yeah, it's somewhat important, but it's not the gospel proper. That's for sure. It's eschatology specifically, but this is theology proper too, because this is one of the ways God demonstrates that He is in fact God and there is no other. So important stuff. Anyway, way too long. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. We'll talk to you soon. Soli Deo Gloria.